Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this installment, a young boy's life gets very hairy when he discovers that he's the son of Bigfoot. 13-year-old Adam, voiced by Pappy Faulkner, has been noticing some weird changes lately. His hair grows back at an alarming rate, time seems to slow down around him, and his feet keep popping out of his shoes. When Adam discovers his father isn't dead, as his mother Shelley, voiced by Lindsay Torrance, claims, he journeys out to find him, only to discover that his father is Bigfoot, voiced by Christopher Parson. But Adam's search may have placed his father in danger, as the evil Hairco, led by Torrance Stone's Wallace Eastman, will stop at nothing to find Bigfoot so he can create a cure for baldness. The son of Bigfoot, or Bigfoot Jr. as it's known in most parts of Europe, is from Belgian animation house N-Wave Pictures. You may not know by name, but you may have seen some of their work. They're the company behind the Sammy's Adventure films, which are basically Finding Nemo for kids that are not old enough to watch Finding Nemo. They also did the 2016 version of Robinson Crusoe, you know, the abysmal one with all the talking animals in it, that was released in the US as The Wildlife and is probably their most well-known flick to date. This movie in particular marks something of a major turning point for the company because it's their final film with Studio Canal, who up until this point had provided financing and distribution for their films. Apparently behind the scenes there was a lot of acrimony and tension between the two companies because Studio Canal wasn't giving the green light to a lot of their projects, hence why they separated last year. And that may explain why the release of The Son of Bigfoot has been so staggered and in some cases rather dumped in some territories. This was originally set to have a wide theatrical UK release back in last summer in August, but that mysteriously disappeared as the time came, and it disappeared up until November, at which point it suddenly appeared in Movies for Juniors screenings, you know, those special morning kids club screenings. That was obviously done to fulfill a contractually obligated theatrical release before they dumped it out on DVD right before Christmas a couple of weeks later. I was very curious to see this movie, not just because of that reason, which normally indicates a very subpar effort, but also because the premise of this movie is absolutely mind-boggling. As soon as I caught wind of this project, I immediately wanted to see this movie because my bad movie radar was going off here. A kid discovering that he's the offspring of Bigfoot? That raises so many questions, some of which don't seem entirely suitable for a children's movie. Like, did his mum have a fling with a creature of woodland legend? Is that what happened here? Is that what the film's actually going to present to us in a supposed family movie? So you're probably asking yourself, what is the deal with Bigfoot in this movie? And I'll gladly answer that question. Bigfoot is depicted in this film not as a creature onto itself, but more as a relatively normal human being who just happens to have advanced traits, as it were, and it seems like he's been living a fairly average life up until this point, aside from dealing with all the excess hair he has. He graduated as being a scientist, he's got a wife, he had a kid with her, and it seems that him going into the woods is a fairly recent development. About a year after the kid was born, he was forced to go into hiding for reasons that will become apparent later in this review. But that's generally the setup for Bigfoot in this movie, so any thoughts that you might have of how this movie might go in bizarre bestiality directions, the filmmakers swiftly avert those because this is a children's movie. But it also kind of shows how the film takes the least imaginative route it could possibly take with every single development in it. It's, alas, a very, very conventional kids movie in a lot of ways, and it has a lot of the tropes that you would associate with with animated features, and particularly sort of B-tier animated films like this one. The way that Bigfoot is characterized in this movie, a lot of the middle act is focused on him, but it's more expositional. It's more trying to build up a lot of the powers. The reason that he has Bigfoot traits is because it turns out he has Neanderthal DNA. That does not even begin to make sense. I mean, I guess it explains the hair and the big feet, but Bigfoot has other key traits in him as well, particularly his healing ability. Oh, you didn't know that? He has a healing power now. He can cure things. I don't understand how that works. Is Bigfoot known for doing that? Is Bigfoot known for curing people in the woods? Okay, I guess he has that now. As you would no doubt guess, this movie is basically meant to be an extended metaphor for adolescence, and this is not exactly a new concept in of itself. This is the same sort of premise that gives us Teen Wolf, for example. But if you come into this movie thinking, oh, he's got these Bigfoot traits, maybe he'll also start to become really good at basketball, this isn't going to be the movie for you. The movie doesn't throw any weird curveballs in that sort of direction, alas. It's very much following its very rigid stock plot. What it really owes a big debt to is more the superhero movie genre, particularly in the first act of the film when Adam's powers start manifesting themselves, apparently for the first time, and he's really taking stock of all the changes that are happening in him. And there's scenes in this movie where time seems to slow down, or he's got super hearing, and the camera sort of veers very close to people talking and things like that. And it gave me a very subconscious flash of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, for example. It very much felt like the scenes in that movie when Peter Parker goes to high school and he's discovering all these new powers, like the webbing coming out of his hands. There's other abilities that come with it, like the ability to slow down time that I mentioned is how he can talk to animals. That's how they hand wave that away, is that they slow down time enough that they can actually make out what they're saying. Again, an idea that seems vaguely familiar. I think I have seen a movie that has done that idea as well, but basically that solely exists to give more characters in the middle of the movie, all these comic relief players, because N-Wave apparently absolutely loves their talking animals. Although, granted, that's almost the expectation for one of these B-level animated films now. I'm thinking of the likes of The Nut Job, for example, and things like that. They all seem to be about talking animals these days. That very much seems to be the rage, and that's one of the key points that the film hits that you have probably seen a dozen times before now. There are no surprises for any adults who decide that they're going to watch The Son of Bigfoot. The script really isn't very good. The script is by far the biggest problem here. It's just not interesting enough. Granted, I wanted a much weirder, more outlandish movie than this one really provides, but really, I just wanted a film that actually had more in it. The biggest problem with The Son of Bigfoot is that it feels very uneventful, it has to be said. It's at this point that I note that N-Wave produces multiple versions of their film. This was released obviously in 2D and 3D, but it was also released in 4D apparently. But the 4D version is just 12 minutes long. It's a cut down version. I could very easily see where they just snip out bits and pieces, and perhaps that is the best way of watching this movie. Just watch it in a little 12-minute chunk. It tries to go for an emotional element of this reuniting between father and son, and a better movie would have got a bit more pathos out of that, a bit more out of the fact that Bigfoot has had to make a lot of sacrifices when it comes to his family, and he's been sending letters to his wife in secret, but he can't come back to her, and a better movie would have tried to wring a bit more emotion out of that scenario, and it's not helped by the fact the script has some very wonky dialogue, it has to be said. Characters seem to go from about 0 to 100 in the space of a couple of lines, scenes will suddenly change tone dramatically in the middle of them, and it would be very jarring. There's an early scene where Adam confronts his mother Susie about the letters that she's been secretly hoarding, and he gets so het up in only a handful of lines that he's screaming, "I hate you!" and it feels totally unearned. There's a later scene where father and son are bonding, and then suddenly Jeopardy suddenly injects itself into the scene, and suddenly Bigfoot's lines are all very much, "You shouldn't have come here, you shouldn't have come here." The way the scene starts and the way the scene ends feel like two totally abrupt ends of the spectrum with nothing in between them. There is some weird timeline flaws as well. So in the middle of the movie, the big instigating action for the plot is that Adam needs to be rescued by Bigfoot. He gets into trouble, he gets caught in a bear trap, and he ends up landing in the road, and he's about to be hit by a truck. And Bigfoot swings out, saves him, gets caught on the dash cam, and the truck driver obviously tries to take advantage of this huge discovery. And he calls up the National Enquirer, and it gets published on their front page. Naturally, that's a vaguely amusing joke. Here's where the weirdness comes in. That happens instantaneously in the film's timeline. So Hairco, we'll get to them in a sec, they discover this story and immediately decide they're going to chase down the truck driver. The truck driver is still at the diner that he made the call at. And it generally seems to imply that this is the same day, or at least a day or so after. It's very, very strange. By far the elements of the movie that shows just how weird this could have gotten in any other hands are its antagonists. The villains of the film are called Hairco, and they are working on a cure for baldness, and to do this, they need Bigfoot's DNA because they want to uncover the secret behind his rapid hair growth. That's what they want him for. And you think to yourself, well, that doesn't seem so bad. I mean, that almost sounds noble. And yet, they go about this in the most evil, Machiavellian way that you can possibly think of. And I have no idea why they act like this, other than the fact that they're supposed to be stock bad guys in a silly animated children's film. And so the film establishes that even though they've had Bigfoot out of their grasp for a fairly long time, they've still been trying to work on cures. They have this running gag where an intern gets shoved in and he keeps getting shot in the butt with experimental darts of fluid. And the first time this happens is purely to establish that they're working on a cure, and what happens is that he grows an afro. And for all intents and purposes, I think that goes to show that they've cured baldness. The catch is that his hair suddenly catches fire. And I'm thinking to myself, that's an easy fix. I mean, the hair growing back is the difficult part. If you can get that down, I'm sure you can work out some way of making it flame retardant. I don't even think you need Bigfoot. You've cracked it all by yourselves. But no, they have to go after Bigfoot. And as it turns out, Bigfoot, when he was a scientist, he was working for Hairco, but it seems like he might have misunderstood what they were doing. They seem to be entirely at cross purposes because he was working on a cure for his hairiness and to try and work out why he had the genetic abnormalities that he had. But the Hairco were working on this cure for baldness, and they discovered his secret and decided that they wanted him. And it just seems like a big mix-up. Or maybe Bigfoot and Hairco just simply didn't see eye to eye, because the latter is very obviously evil. They're the kind of villains that think nothing of setting a forest on fire. Yes, that happens in this movie. Suddenly they have men pulling out flamethrowers. I don't know why a hair development company needs flamethrowers, but they have them, and they set up this elaborate trap to capture Bigfoot, where Adam is locked in a car and they push it into the blaze. So not only are they completely cool with destroying the environment, they're perfectly fine with child endangerment / murder. I think this is being a little bit extreme for the sake of hair. There are some other questionable things, like a group of very stereotyped Japanese businessmen to the point where they're taking photos of everything, or a scene where Adam hitchhikes over to Bigfoot, because that's a great message to send out to children. That's 100% safe. But for the most part, it's remarkable by just how harmless it really is. This is very much a time passer for its intended audience, and it is fairly decently animated. It's not the top tier of theatrical animation, but you can clearly tell that this had a budget behind it, and obviously a difference between something like this and its big budget competitors at, say, Pixar and DreamWorks is merely a matter of texturing. Ironically, for a film that's so focused on hair, it's those little details and intricacies that seem like they're less developed in this movie. There is a little bit of a tendency for characters to seem quite plasticky in places. For the most part, it's fairly bright, colourful, and very aesthetically pleasing. And it's clear that where N-Wave has spent most of their attention is on big action set pieces, because they find every excuse to work them into the plot. There are endless chase scenes here, not just in the third act, which is largely comprised of this material, but also earlier on in the film we got some stock bully characters, so that we can have several scenes of them chasing after him, and when in the middle act that they're learning their powers, there's several scenes where they just race through the forest. And you can very much tell this was purely to take advantage of the fact that the film was being released in 3D and both in 4D. That I'd imagine that would be very immersive in both of those formats, and it's at those moments that the animation looks by far at its strongest. I really liked that this is an animated film that doesn't have big names forced onto it. I liked that this was an animated movie that actually hired voice actors. The kid that plays Adam, Pappy Faulkner, he's perfectly fine in the role. He's not annoying or bratty. I think he's perfectly charming, and I think that kids will relate to Adam, which is exactly what you want in a film like this. I think that this is definitely not going to be for anyone older than about, I don't know, 13 or 14, basically. And if you're a bad movie fan that's lured in by the premise, I'm just going to have to say, this isn't for you. Skip this one. And I think that parents will be relieved to know that at least this isn't annoying like something like N-Wave's Robinson Crusoe. It's perfectly harmless. And alas, that's also kind of the disappointing part. The Son of Bigfoot has an absolutely bonkers premise, but sadly doesn't really live up to it, never truly embracing the oddity of its tale. It instead ends up being a very average and by-the-numbers children's animation that feels all too familiar, from the usual talking animal sidekicks to the central metaphor of adolescence, which feels less indebted to the mythos of Bigfoot and more to those of superheroes, given the filmmakers lift scenes from the likes of Spider-Man. The animation is of a high standard if lacking texture and not quite up to the levels of its big name competitors, and the voice acting is fine, but the script is the weak link, being very thin on story in the middle and has a curious lack of energy. Those brought in by the bizarre idea will alas discover that the Son of Bigfoot is simply a mild-mannered time passer for kids. If you like this review, then you can go wild over at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.